I just wanted to, alongside what Heidi was saying, is the plan, are you going to be making any changes to the plan based on the last two meetings and this meeting, or is what it is now what it will be going to the council?
I think there could be some minor tweaks. I don't foresee, well, let me take that back. We are definitely interested in what we hear at tonight's meeting and the last two meetings, and we took good notes, and there might be some changes based on the comments we hear. I can't say for sure, but
sorry to interrupt. The proposed changes that are being shown tonight are kind of the outlines of how we are going to update the plan that was released, though. So the plan that was released over the summer will be updated mainly on the proposed changes side, but there might be other changes that we do as well that are minor. Like
by all means, we're interested in what folks say tonight, and we took good notes of the last two meetings as well, and I think it's still open. So we're certainly
okay. Thank
you.
When we read updates to table of contents, on this 7-page document about tonight's meeting, this is well, I guess this is dated October 30th. Are these kind of things that you've reflected on from the first two, and you kind of, as of now, it's like a working draft, like planning on using these updates?
No, we haven't changed anything. This presentation tonight and the memo that we shared at the first meeting that we released on the website, that has not changed at all. So after tonight, we're going to assess what we've heard, and if there are things that make sense to tweak, then we'll do that. But
Gotcha. So the October 30 memorandum here, this is not post other meetings changes.
No.
Okay. I don't know. I feel like that was so long ago. When I read updates, I assumed that these must have taken into account the first two meetings.
No, it's something we released, right when we did this first in-person meeting on October 30th. So
excellent. Okay. Man, time has felt weird these last couple of weeks. All right. I'm gonna
let's get going.
I'm gonna blame daylight savings, and I'm gonna remute myself. Don't worry about that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Effie. Well, we're live. So thanks everybody for joining us tonight. If you haven't met me, I'm Eric Lashinsky, the Chief of Comprehensive Planning for the city in our Planning and Zoning Department. I've been the project manager on our draft public water access plan for the last couple of years now. We've been working with the National Park Service as our primary funder and major partner, and the Volpe Center, which is a division of the U.S. Department of Transportation, has been our consultant on this plan. And Casey Ortiz, my colleague in Planning and Zoning, is here tonight as well. Thank you, Jess, for the suggestion to do this virtual meeting. We have done 2 in-person meetings to share proposed changes to our draft public water access plan. We did both of those at the Pip Moyer Rec Center. One was on October 30th. I think the next one was November 6th. We had good turnouts at those meetings, and we're reaching more people tonight. This meeting is being recorded. It's going to be available on the city's YouTube channel so other people can watch it later, which I think is a great benefit. So without further delay.
And I want to add one more note before Eric continues. If you know anyone that wants to watch this video, it's currently being streamed live on the City of Annapolis YouTube page. If you just refresh the screen, you should be able to find it pretty instantly, and we'll be posting the video on our public water access webpage right after this meeting.
Yes, thank you, Casey. This is our moment of Zen before we get into the presentation. A view of Horn Point Park recently, beautiful morning. We're all very fortunate to have parks like this in the city. This is one of the best, though, like all of our existing public water access sites, certainly has room for improvement. But I was just feeling very fortunate to happen upon this the other day. For folks who may not be aware, I'm sure most of you are, we've been maintaining a website for this project, this plan, for a couple of years now, and we've added to it over time. We've shared progress. I'm going to just kind of do a quick review of what is on this website. It's going to kind of scroll through. There's a video from our mayor talking about why this plan is important. Oops. Uh-oh. Okay, this is opening. We're opening the draft plan here through the website. It's just kind of scrolling through. And really, you can just Google Annapolis Public Water Access Plan, and it'll take you to a link for this. It's probably an easier way to find it on the city's website. This is the mapping tool that we released at the same time as the draft plan that we hope will be a really great way for people to know all of the many sites that the city has for getting to the water. And as we add to the network over time, we'll add to this mapping tool. There's really key information for each site. And we think that what we heard from a lot of folks is really just like a lack of awareness of all of the sites that exist today. And so we wanted to be more clear about that and what you'd expect at each site. The comment log link here is something we've updated over time. On the right side, you can see we've tagged every comment with how it has impacted the plan, or whether we just reviewed it, or whether it was beyond the scope. We have a tab at the bottom for letters we received from organizations. So they have about 355 comments in there. We have a timeline here that reflects our best understanding of how this project will finish out and ultimately be adopted by the City Council. I'll talk more about that tonight, but link to news stories that we've seen come out since we launched the plan, some of the maps that are in the plan, and then some of the original ideas, goals for the plan. And then finally, some precedent projects that you can look at that inspired the plan. So we got a really wide range of comments when we released the draft over the summer in June, I believe it was. We did 2 meetings in July at Pitt Moyer. Both were extremely well attended, in my opinion, as far as community meetings go. One had 45 people, the other had 72. We were also at the Community Fun Day at Truxton Park on a Saturday, and really encountered a lot more than 25 people, but I think those are the folks that left comments. And we collected Post-it notes at these events, which made it into the comment log. And you can see in the comment log where we got our comments from. Here are some key metrics. And I should have said this at the beginning, but I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes. Hopefully it won't be longer than that. After that, we'll have question and answer period and discussion, and there'll be time for everybody's questions to be answered. And we're happy to follow up if not, but appreciate you all being patient, hearing the presentation. It's going to be like as if we're at an in-person meeting, and this is the exact same format that we did in our previous meeting. So 355 formal comments, as I mentioned, 130 residents at 2 in-person events. We had 6 organizations send in letters on behalf of their groups. 20% of our comments came straight from Admiral Heights, related to our recommendations for 2 sites within Admiral Heights. And then 255 comments through our survey, which was really the bulk, the best vehicle for receiving comments, it seemed. So here, just some simple pie charts to explain on the left where we got our comments from. And then on the right, I'm really proud to say that more than 50% of the comments have ended up in changes to the plan. We really took the comments we heard to heart. We digested them over many weeks and discussed them, and they definitely led to substantive changes to the plan, which I'm going to talk about tonight. I will say we're still writing the updated plan. So what we're going over are the types of changes that are going to be reflected in the plan. But these are some of the major takeaways from the comments we heard. There was kind of a range of comments that were basically saying the city should focus on existing sites that the city owns and manages before expanding to other sites. We get it. The fact is we are doing that. There's something like 25 or 26 active projects in the city's capital budget right now for sites that are already owned and managed by the city. But we don't need to wait till those are done to expand water access, which is something that people are, a lot of people in the city are asking for, particularly in places where it doesn't exist today. We need to augment the accessibility. Implementation, really, this is a really great point that was made in some comments we heard, just that there was some question about how are we going to actually roll out the plan in the future, and what are the priorities. There's a lot in this plan, and it wasn't clear what, we did kind of grade the opportunity recommendations by short-term, midterm, long-term. It still wasn't quite clear, what's going to kind of rise to the top, and so we are going, I'll talk about what that's going to look like, but we're going to add a whole new section, focus on implementation. Policy, got lots of comments about room for improvement on the way we were wording our policy recommendations, and so we definitely adjusted some of those. Property rights was probably the biggest issue, most controversial topic in this plan. I'm going to try to explain where we were coming from in including some currently privately owned sites for consideration in this plan. I'll save my comments till we get to that point. Habitat, another great point. The plan was not thinking outside of habitat issues of restoration, ecological functions, et cetera. It wasn't really clear that that was a focus, and so we've added some content related to that. And then finally, there were a wide range of misconceptions about the impact that adding or improving neighborhood street and parks have to city communities. And we really want to be very clear about setting the record straight for how these sites benefit neighborhoods. There were misconceptions about the traffic that's caused, other nuisances, just kind of a wide range of concerns that have not really played out in parts of the city where we can already point to decades of concentration of street and parks. Murray Hill, Eastport, for example, both of these communities have benefited from having extensive number of water access locations that are really embraced by neighbors and have added to property values and enlivened quality of life. So if you've been, if you're new to this, you're not aware of why we're doing this, just 2 or 3 slides to remind folks that we have a city with extensive waterfront, but very little of it is truly public, meaning you don't need to pay to use it. You don't need to have a boat. You don't need to own property. So we're trying to improve on that. People think of waterfront when they think of Annapolis. And it's true, we have an incredible network of existing sites, many of which need some new investment, but there's a whole wide range of areas where we can improve and address inequities in the city for in communities that don't have enough access to the waterfront. This whole project started with our Maritime Task Force in 2021 that included Wendy O'Sullivan from the National Park Service, She's the Chesapeake superintendent for the Park Service, and the whole intent of the Maritime Task Force was really not about public water access. It was about the maritime industry and the economy. But inevitably, we talked a lot about opportunities for improved water access within our maritime zones where you have properties that could be leveraged for better access. And that led to this idea of a plan. We kind of sketched out the things that could be in that plan, and we've been pretty consistent with that. This existing site mapping, strategies for improved connectivity, standards, program partnership opportunities, ultimately a more equitable access framework. And then these are the outcomes. We did a needs assessment, not spelled correctly, but this was our first step, released in July 2022. Due to funding, we took a break before getting into the plan that you've been seeing for the last few months. And then we have the mapping tool as the third piece here. So I'm going to just kind of walk through what we're proposing to improve this plan. I should say on the left is a memorandum that was issued back on October 30th. It's available on the website for this project. You can download it as a PDF, and it basically has the same content that I'm explaining tonight. Hopefully just as clear. But really every section of the plan is getting some update, some revision, some improvement. I'll start by talking about the table of contents is going to have a new section called implementation. Some of the things that are going to be in that, beyond actually prioritizing the projects themselves and the improvements, which is kind of the obvious thing. I should have listed it here, but there's some of the things that contribute to whether a project is prioritized. We really want 4 Ps: public, private, people, partnerships. Sorry. And that's really means ideally we have projects that are supported by their communities, where we have people coming to your council members or staff and saying, hey, we have a need in our neighborhood. There's a demand for water access. We don't have a place. We haven't seen any investment for a while. That really helps to elevate projects. Having a business nearby that wants to help invest, that also, really anything that can kind of help accelerate a project. But equity is a huge part of it. Where do we not have water access today, or not enough of it? Lease agreements. There's a number of sites in the city that are city-owned but leased to nonprofit organizations. And we want to be very clear in the future when we have opportunities to lease city land to other organizations about what the expectation is for that and how we can best advance public water access, equitable public water access. Site management and maintenance are things that need to be more broadly considered in the future. Whenever we add a new site, we have to have a good understanding of what the maintenance considerations are going to be. Do we have the funding? How do we expand funding if needed? And then performance metrics are things like, we should be tracking how many sites we have in the city, how much linear feet of shoreline, how many paddle launches. We're still thinking about what those metrics are, but I think there's things we can look at over time to understand how much impact we're having. We want to be much more clear early in this plan, in the introduction, about the benefits of public water access. I think, and this is a response, just getting just a lot of comments about, people not understanding the value of this. And it comes from people who, they have a private dock, or, they just don't necessarily get that there's a need in cities to have shared resources, and parks are really a thing that differentiate great cities from just mediocre cities. For a city like Annapolis to not have water access points in certain parts of the city is not really acceptable. We want to be clear that this plan is consistent with statewide goals and really Chesapeake Bay watershed goals. It's consistent with Anne Arundel County goals. We want to add a regional map, which would show people that there are sites outside of the city that are also very important water access locations for city residents. Quiet Waters Park is the obvious one. It's probably the most popular water access location for city residents, but it's not in the city. So we actually have that map. We did it as part of our early site analysis work, existing conditions analysis, and it's important to add that. Public water access success stories. There's a whole range of sites that we could showcase. I mean, I think this plaque on the left from Horn Point Park is really an important thing to acknowledge, just how we got to having so many interesting street end parks. There's a important history to tell there. It's told in other places already, like this plaque, but former Mayor Moyer was really instrumental, as many of you know. And then again, just talking about the misconceptions about public water access. We really want to counter some of the narratives that are out there that are not accurate. When we look at our existing sites, the only change that we're planning at this point are to add the South Annapolis Yacht Center. And this was an overlooked site we should have had initially. While it doesn't provide a ton of public water access, it is a viable water taxi stop, pickup location, drop off. We have a recommendation for it to be a better site for that. I'll get to that shortly, but that's the one site we're looking to add to our existing network. We're going to be adding some graphics to improve how we tell the story about public water access. This is one example, this heat map that shows where water access exists today. It's just another way of looking at it. Instead of just these individual site icons, you can kind of see the density of access this way. And it's important to acknowledge that there might be gaps in our network that are kind of micro gaps in my view. Eastport, for example, Upper Eastport, north of 6th Street, has a street end park at almost every street end. Obviously, not all of them are in the best condition, but they're there. Whereas south of the bridge, we don't have a ton of public water access. In fact, every site has really specific, there's a number of active projects, but every single one of those projects has is in a different phase and different constraints and challenges. And so we want to be clear about what we mean by gaps in the network. When we talk about opportunity sites, that was a term that was confusing to some folks because frankly, like 2/3 of these sites, maybe more, maybe 3/4 of these sites are existing sites that just need some additional investment in specific ways. So we're going to call this sites for improvement and expansion of public water access. We want to identify how many are existing, how many are active projects in the city's capital improvement program. Many of these are, like I said, about 25 or 26 of them are active sites, and some of them are active sites being invested in by other partners, not just the city. Here's a sampling of those sites I mentioned. Hawkins Cove in Eastport is well into its design process. It's approaching 60% design right now. It's a living shoreline and park and trail connection to Truxton Park. Robert Eads is going to break ground in late winter of 25, most likely, or spring of 25. Elktonia Cars Beach is a really substantial project. It's going to be our first beach park. Most of you know the important African-American history of the site, so I won't go into that, but And that's a major project, 6 acres. Fifth Street Park is where we've identified a landing for a future electric ferry connection between downtown and Eastport. Tucker Street Park is also going to be breaking ground on improvements in the new year and was recently approved by the Port Wardens. And then Gateway Park is another large, exciting project. It's not city land, it's state-owned and Navy property, but the city and the county have been working together to create a nature park on this forested peninsula that for many people has been kind of off the map. It's right off of Rao Boulevard next to the Archives building, offers exceptional views of downtown and College Creek. And Anne Arundel County funded a master plan feasibility study for improvements to this site that is wrapping up now. And I'm excited to add this to our network in the coming year. We did launch 2 concept design initiatives on Weems Creek and College Creek, the 2 creeks that have the least public water access today. We focused on these 2 priority sites and had great turnout in events in July among neighborhood residents. We had follow-up meetings recently. In fact, the Tolson Street one was just last night and was a very positive meeting. And we're also looking at Annapolis Street in West Annapolis, which is more of a view area of Weems Creek, but could be a lot more improved than what it is today. So when we talk about the Creekshed recommendations, we go creek by creek in this plan, and I'm just going to share some of the highlights that I think are important. We got a lot of questions. But across the board, we're going to add this level of anticipated cost, a new column. This was a comment we got from a few folks. I thought it was a good one. It's something we did in our comprehensive plan that was adopted over the summer by the city council. It's hard to put a cost on things that haven't been designed. You don't know how much boardwalk or how much pathway or what kind of furniture you're adding or any of these kind of other amenities, but we can generally make some assumptions and put in this ballpark level of cost, and that can help us fundraise and prioritize projects. In terms of the recommendations for specific sites, I want to highlight a few here. We got a number of comments about this recommendation that we had in the plan for the B&A Railroad in West Annapolis that connects to Shady Lake, a not very well known body of water connecting to the Severn River. And we got comments about not only providing access, but doing things that could actually improve the ecology of that lake, which has been worsening over time. There's a lot of sediment there. The wildlife that was once there isn't there. So we expanded this recommendation to be more specific to the health of the Shady Lake. For a recommendation that we had about connecting the Maryland Department of Natural Resource offices to College Creek, we actually got specific comments from DNR that wanted us to align our trail connection with an area that they've already identified for public parking that's available around the clock. It has electric charging stations, and they've really wanted to promote that. So it's a simple thing, but they're very supportive of this recommendation. They just wanted to tweak it a little. And then finally, our Tolson Street recommendation is just reflecting the work that we've been doing with the community in West Annapolis and is just more specific to some of the things the community members have expressed wanting in this project. A few specific recommendations that are kind of amending key sites that are on people's minds across the city. Our Truxton Park boat ramp specifically. Many of you have been following the saga around the electric current hazard there. A consultant hired by the city maybe 5 months ago. I can't remember the exact time frame. I think he started his work in the spring and maybe concluded over the summer. Did an exhaustive study of what level of electric current is in the water near the boat ramp, and actually at the bottom of Pump House Road behind the swimming pool area. These two sites registered very minor levels of current, and to the point where we've changed signs recently, and they're not probably still not adequate to encourage use of these of the boat ramp for paddle access. But that's the guidance, that this area is safe for paddle access. Swimming is going to be discouraged from any areas in the city where we have active marinas, but the area is now safe, and we want to make sure people are clear about that for paddle access. And that Crab, the Chesapeake Regional Area Boating Facility, this is a site that's very unique. It's on Bemby Beach Road. It's city land that is leased to Crab, the organization that provides a range of services to people with disabilities, disadvantaged youth, veterans, and others who don't have adequate access to the water. And they have a very specific mission. They're unique. We're proud to have them here in the city. We did quite a bit of research to kind of understand the nature of the agreement that they have in place, the amount of dialogue that had already happened with the state, who had provided program open space money for this project. And it seemed that a lot of things have already been agreed to that this plan really can't undo. And so we sort of stepped back the recommendation a little bit, that quite a bit actually, to really just be more clear that, you know, if this is going to be a gated city-owned facility, we need some signage that can help tell people what's happening behind these gates. If they come here, we want to provide information ahead of time, perhaps on the city's mapping tool, so that people don't come here expecting to be able to use the facility if they're not, if they don't have a disability or some other advance arrangements. But we think that would be the minimum, given that there's a city-owned property and there's a public mission to this site. But we did find a couple of new sites. Well, we didn't have to find them per se. The South Annapolis Yacht Center, we knew about. We've just overlooked this. We're adding that, as I mentioned, and we have a recommendation for how this site should be improved in the short term. It's really just about being more clear about where the pedestrian access is to the site. It's kind of hidden behind a bush. It does not appear open at all, but I've used it. It is open. Other people have used it. We want to make sure it's well marked. And then a walled street is a site that we had a recommendation to look at from the public, somebody in the public, and it appears to be a very viable opportunity for a street end park, actually right next to the Crab facility. So while we might be not able to adjust the lease agreement of the Crab program and encourage more access there, we have an opportunity to create a street end park nearby that would augment Ellen Moyer Nature Park. And you know, like a lot of our street end parks, this is a stormwater outfall. You can see the inlet right here. It's not maybe the most appealing site right now, but with a little imagination, it's not hard to see a ramp to a floating dock right here, a kayak rack, a place to sit on a bench and appreciate the view. And with a lot of our sites, we're working with our public works department to improve stormwater management. And so rather than having stormwater running down the street right into the inlet and then right into the creek, we probably have an opportunity to catch that water, take up some asphalt, create a rain garden or some other natural design to filter that stormwater before it gets in the creek. So this is a new site that we're going to add to the list of opportunities. I mentioned the privately owned sites being a big topic in the comments we received. I'm not going to read the language that we had in the plan initially. It's here on the slide. I thought we were very clear and deliberate about the reason for adding these private sites, but we got a whole lot of comments from folks who, many of which it was pretty clear hadn't read the plan and were just being kind of egged on to comment by neighbors and so forth, and which is fine. I mean, we're happy to receive any comments that we can, but it's really important to acknowledge that the city has no intention of taking private land away from any individual or organization. We're being very sensitive to those concerns. And the only reason we chose to include privately owned sites in this plan as a separate list here is that, frankly, in some of the locations of the city where we have a real deficiency of water access, public water access, we have to be thinking broadly about the future. And we're looking really far into the future. This isn't a plan that's going to be fully implemented in a couple of years or even maybe 10 years. It might be 20 years. It may be more than that. But we're going to bite off chunks of it over time. Circumstances change. The city is very old. We have places that were once public that are now private. We have places that were once private that are now public. Organizations change, populations change, and we want to be in a position to expand public water access equitably however we can. And so when you look at this list, some of these are sites owned by homeowners associations. Some of these are church sites. Some are apartment complexes. We have a Navy site. These are all viable sites to be public, assuming their owners are open to that. And that's really important thing to clarify here, that nothing really happens unless the owners of these sites are interested in inviting more public access. And we want to be clear about the benefits that come with that. That was something, and we went to the Admiral Heights Improvement Association because we had gotten 73 comments just from that neighborhood. And we wanted to really clarify why we included two of their parks in this plan. And, you know, it was clear from that meeting that over time they may have challenges paying for maintenance of their sites. The city wants to be in a position to help, but any assistance the city provides to take care of those sites has to come with additional public water access. There's studies that show that living next to a public asset provides far more value than a private location, a private park. You don't have the liabilities, you don't have the maintenance concerns. And if you look at neighborhoods like Murray Hill and Eastport, where you have high concentrations of public waterfront, these sites have been maintained by the city in partnership with neighbors who have really adopted these sites, and they've added considerable value to these neighborhoods. So hopefully that helps to explain where we're going to improve in this area. But we actually went farther and we rewrote a couple of these recommendations. The ones for Admiral Heights specifically will be changed. On the left, you can see the original wording where it spoke about working with the Admiral Heights Improvement Association to explore feasibility, et cetera. We wanted to be hyper specific. The ownership of these sites is not going to change anytime soon. And frankly, it may never change. It doesn't have to change. If the Admiral Heights Improvement Association needs help maintaining these parks, the city is here and would be interested in assisting, but would need to make these sites public. And that's really, that's the return. So hopefully that helps to clarify folks for Admiral Heights. I don't know if any everybody from that neighborhood is here tonight. In the goals, we had 6 goals. I'm just going to talk about a few of the updates. We provided recommendations for each of these goal areas. Under goal 4, resilient design, we're adding a very specific recommendation about habitat restoration based on comments we received. And Hawkins Cove is perfect example. This project is being driven heavily by habitat restoration. Bulkhead is being removed and replaced with a living shoreline. We're adding a lot more trees to this area and creating a passive park and nature play area. And it's going to be a huge improvement. This particular policy recommendation was very confusing, and we got a lot of comments about it. And we tried to improve on it, clarify that the big point to clarify is that this recommendation about changing our zoning regulations is forward-looking. It would not apply to existing development in the city. For example, a condo development that has a private waterfront. We are not seeking to force that property or any property to become public. It's their prerogative. But future development, we want to be specific that future multifamily residential, meaning apartment buildings, whether condos or rentals, commercial properties, and mixed use development where we might have retail and residential combined, or maritime uses combined with some other use. With those types of projects, we want to require public water access if these properties are on the waterfront. We simply need more policy tools to create the kind of water access that many people in the city are asking for. I think an example would be, in fact, we don't really have any boardwalks in the city. We don't really have any connected waterfront, which is surprising to people who visit the city. And it's because we have very limited ability to create those things within our zoning requirements. Program and partnership initiatives. This section of the plan highlights a lot of the partners that already exist that we at the city work with and rely on to help expand public water access opportunities. And it also includes new organization opportunity, partnership opportunities with specific organizations. And the summer camps provided by the Maritime Museum are one example. But we, in the comment period, became aware of a number of missed organizations and companies that already provide remarkable benefits to the public and are great partners. And Watermark is probably the most blaring missing partner. You know, this is an organization you might associate with the Harbor Queen or the water taxi system, but they are really much more than that. They provide opportunity for school groups and community organizations to get on the water. I think they take out 17,000 students in a year. So we really want to acknowledge them as a current and future partner. Acton Landing Community Association is next to Acton Cove Park, and they were really instrumental in the last 2 years to securing funding for improvements to that park. And so they've been a great partner that we want to continue working with. Blacks of the Chesapeake was already acknowledged, but not specifically as a current partner. We address them as a future partner, but they're already working with the city, particularly on the Cars Beach property. And then we're adding the Community Foundation of Anne Arundel County as a potential funding partner, and the Maryland Reentry Resource Center, which has a very unique restoration program for formerly incarcerated individuals who are back in public life and need job opportunities and training. And their Chesapeake Bay Restoration Program is one of a kind. And lots of organizations are working with the Reentry Resource Center already. So we want to work with them as well. And then the section on alternative mobility initiatives, really the only thing we want to clarify is this point about parks being destination parks or neighborhood parks. This was kind of in that area of misconceptions about what actually happens when you have a neighborhood street end park. This is not a park that draws people from across the city typically. This is a park that people walk to or ride their bike to, and it's really the goal for that park. Most of these sites have no parking options, maybe a very limited amount of street parking. So, there's kind of this misconception that we got, whether it was genuine or not, I'm not sure, but just that some of these tiny street end parks would be flooded with people as soon as they were created. And while we want them to be used, that's just not the way that works. We've seen how these places operate, and most of them you'd be lucky to see one or two people at most whenever you visit. So, and we want to encourage people to walk and ride to get to these sites. And finally, we just had some pretty basic recommendations for improving the mapping tool from comments we received. A lot of people talked about having a print map, which I thought would be a great thing to be able to give to people, have available around town. It probably won't change that frequently. We could have water paddle trails on it. Photo recommendation we heard, highlighting key amenities. And we had some incorrect amenities identified for certain sites, and we want to correct those. Incorrect references to water taxi pickups, incorrect references to grocery store, very specific stuff here. But I'm finally just provides better information on which sites have good bike parking. So Casey is taking the lead on updating this mapping tool while we're trying to get it to a place where it can be released at the same time as the new updated plan, or the plan in the new year. We're focusing more on the plan, and we want this to be in a good place as well, but they're kind of operating in parallel. And lastly, before we get into Q&A, our schedule as we see it right now, we are right here, late October, early November, public meetings to share proposed changes. We're kind of mid to late October. We added this virtual meeting, but our other meetings have happened already. We're issuing the updated draft plan. It's probably going to be more like mid-December. We're working with City Council to prepare a resolution for adopting the plan. That's a procedural thing that really just initiates the process for City Council to review the draft plan and then make any amendments that they see necessary. So there'll be additional hearings, opportunities to provide testimony once this is introduced to City Council. And then best case scenario, perhaps there's a vote to adopt this plan in February or March of the coming year. So with that, and this beautiful view of Amos Garrett Park, I will happily take questions. I just ask that you raise your hand, and you can unmute, and we'll try to get through everybody that has questions. So I see Jess has one. Go for it. Thank you all for being patient. I know I talked longer than I hoped, but that's always the case.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you, because this is definitely comprehensive, and thank you for doing this virtual event. October, November has been a bit insane. So I appreciate you doing this. I had just a couple of questions that, one is, I love the idea of the photos from the water, but what about access on the water? I didn't really hear that discussed, and I know that that's been discussed at some of the other meetings, but about people being able to access, whether it's through mooring fields, increased access to mooring fields, or increased access to, making sure there's enough dinghy docks, or, just different, basically access onto the water once you're at the water, right? So but particularly in terms of things like mooring fields or mooring balls or anchorage fields that are more accessible. Some of those shallow water anchorages to make it easier for smaller boats to have a place where they can go out and anchor and be set, whether it's a permanent type thing, like many other waterfront communities do. So that was one thing. And then the other, I don't know if you want to answer that before I ask the other question.
Sure, yeah. So we did have, in the draft that was released over the summer, we do have a recommendation or policy that is specific to, it's more about the mooring policy. It's basically saying that any policies dictating how our moorings are utilized should be geared towards residents as much as tourists. And it refers to the pricing and availability. But we could certainly expand that to talk about additional moorings and looking for opportunities for that. I mean, I tend to think that we're maxed out in terms of the space, but maybe that's not the case. I haven't asked that of the harbor master, but perhaps there's additional room for moorings. We also have in the memo that we released with these proposed changes, I didn't go through every single update that we're proposing. So I encourage folks to look at that memo, but in there we have something about revising the standards for small craft that are allowed to dock at the street end dinghy docks. And that's really more about taking some of the pressure off of city dock. And, basically, I think we have something about the policy for how you dock at those street ends. I have to review. I don't have the memo up, but I'm pretty sure we added something about tie-up policy and being a little bit more permissive on that. But
okay,
we'll look at that more. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah. And I definitely think, I would like to see, an evaluation done of what spots are available. I can think of a few places where we have fairly shallow flats that are not usable for navigation by most boats in the city, but that certainly would work for small boat anchorages or small boat mooring, much like you see, down in the Outer Banks or up on Cape Cod, or where you just have a bunch of boats. I mean, even the picture right here, if you're looking out, there's certainly, I feel like, more space for anchorages and or moorings back in there. And obviously, as a boater, anchorages are great because you can sort of set your own thing. But as a public water access person, moorings are a little bit better because people can then come in and just pick up and go and don't have to worry about knowing, and you don't have to worry about the fear of somebody having set their anchor well or not set their anchor well. There's just a level of safety that's involved in a mooring field. Our mooring fields are pretty wide and they're pretty expansive. I'm not exactly sure how supportive of public water access the current harbor master is, which leads me to my second question, which is, and I have not had a chance to fully go through everything, but is it spelled out in there? And when you're talking about the legislation that's going to be come forward about ensuring that all of our departments, whether it's Office of Law or Harbor Master or Planning and Zoning, are making decisions with the express goal of increasing and supporting public water access, so that, if there's a question of yes or no, and, more public water access is the yes, that we go towards the yes rather than just the automatic no. And just making sure that, because as we've talked about, it's one thing to have a mayor or even a city council that's like, we want public water access, if the people that are making the actual decisions in planning and zoning or in the harbor master or in the Office of Law are not making decisions that support public water access.
Yeah, that's a great point. City governments are kind of not, they're certainly not monolithic. there's lots of different voices here, but I think that the best answer to that point is I honestly think it's going to continue being a challenge as long as our city code and policies have any ounce of vagueness or are discouraging water access in any way, or aren't enforcing it, or aren't. I think it really goes back to the policies we have in the books. I think that to the degree that staff across different departments are aligned in, being all very supportive and encouraging of expanding water, I think, frankly, it's going to continue being a political issue and a cultural issue that is going to have to be driven by our elected officials, our city council, our mayor. Those folks have to be really behind this, and that, we change our elected officials every so often. But I think one of the goals in doing plans like this and getting it adopted by the city council is that it becomes a legal document. It's not, this plan will not change our code, our city development code, or other requirements on its own. It still will need new legislation to be passed, but it provides a roadmap for elected officials to do that. And, it just basically becomes an important document to guide our policies on water access. So that's kind of how I think, I hate to say it, but I mean, I think to some degree, people are still going to have to advocate. But I think this plan will help a lot to.
Oh, I definitely agree. And I think that, if you can, with the legislation and to that, exactly what you're just saying, just make sure that it's written in there that water access is the prime. I mean, like we had in the 80s, right? In the 80s, we had code that specified, and even the Maryland Condominium Code in the 80s specified what you were talking about developments requiring public water access, or if they were going to be taking away water access, hence the easement at Wells Cove and other places. And, I think that just making sure that it's written into law so that you don't get a situation like SAYC where it was left sort of up to the people that were in charge of making the decisions to make that decision, as opposed to it just being part of law and there's not a question. You don't get to choose whether or not you want to have water access or not. And planning and zoning, whoever it is, doesn't get to choose whether or not they want to require it or not. It's just their part of code. So thank you.
Good, excellent points. Thank you. Tim, you're next up.
Thanks, Eric, and very nice presentation. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm a downtown resident, and I'm just thinking about the potential impact on parking. If there's, heightened emphasis on water access and it's being more advertised and the interactive map and everything's available, which I think is fantastic. I'm afraid the next thing is we're going to have people yelling and wanting to have handicap parking set aside at these street ends where, I'm thinking of end of Market Street, end of Conduit, Shipwright, where it can't afford to lose a half a parking spot, let alone 3 of them to handicap parking. I'm just concerned that there could be an impact for water access that gets used 2% of the time on the local residents that use that parking 100% of the time. Has that been thought through?
Yeah. So I know we have a recommendation to add handicap parking at all sites. That's a current recommendation in the plan, I think under policy or access, one of those 2 goals. I think just as a general practice, we look at every site specifically and what are the constraints at each site. And I think, we have to evaluate the parking constraints that are at each site individually. I mean, I think there are federal laws around ADA access to parks, and we're gonna have to follow those to some degree. I think some of these sites don't have ADA parking today because really they haven't been typical parks. Some of the ones downtown have been maintained by our public works department because they're really just a bulkhead with a ladder, and some of them have a floating dock, but dinghy tie up. But like with any change that we make to our roadways, we work with nearby residents, and to the extent that there's some impact to the neighborhood that one ADA spot is going to create, I mean, we're going to have to listen and see what the situation is. But just broadly speaking about parking issues, these are sites that are not going to invite a lot of people to drive to, or if they do, they're dropping off a kayak and then they're going and parking somewhere else. But the first time somebody who maybe has never come to Amos Garrett Park and sees the situation, or Acton Cove Park, I mean, they're not going to be probably driving there again. They're going to come by foot, or they're going to come by bike, or it's something that I think we can address with our mapping tool as well. Just in the beta form that we made available, you can kind of see every site is clearly identified in regard to
Yep.
parking
Well,
constraints. But
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that, the fact that they're gonna come by bike or on foot. But if there's two spots on the street that are taken up by handicapped parking only spots, that's gonna have a huge impact on these small downtown street ends where 100% of the parking is occupied every evening.
yeah,
And if the local taxpaying residents can't use two spots on their street because they've been set aside for handicap parking, because it's designated as a park now instead of a street end dock, expect a good uprising.
yeah. I mean, it's part of our life here in Annapolis, to get into parking disputes, it seems. But I think every site is going to be different, and we're going to look at how much off-street parking people have already, and for sites that aren't accessible to somebody in a wheelchair already, like Market Street Park or Shipwright, Conduit Street Park. I mean, I don't necessarily see us creating an ADA parking spot tomorrow, until
But
there's actually
as long
some.
as it's infused with common sense like that, I think we'll be fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks for your comments. John Taylor and Cynthia, you're on the air. You're muted still.
There, how's that?
Gotcha.
Better, thank you. So this is Cindy Domacy. I'm John Taylor's other half, and we live in Truxton Heights. And you started out at the presentation by saying that habitat is a major concern in moving this plan forward, and also impacts on neighborhoods. And our neighborhood, Truxton Heights, is very concerned about the proposed paddling concession that you're planning for the end of Spa Creek in the what's called the Boathouse property in Truxton Park. And our primary concerns are about wildlife habitat. We have so little undeveloped land in the city for wildlife, and also for passive enjoyment of the natural beauty of our community. And we have several concerns from our neighborhood, and I know you're aware of them. So we've mentioned, that we really feel that this paddle concession would be better placed over by the boat ramp in Truxton Park. There's parking there. The water is deeper. There's toilets. The water is probably cleaner because there's more water flow over there. So less coliform bacteria, which is a big problem at the end of the creek where you're planning this boating concession. So I'm wondering, why the pushback about using the existing facilities that you have over by the boat ramp for this concession.
Well, yeah, Cindy, you're right. I have been hearing the concerns from your neighbors at all of our past meetings. So it's definitely not a new topic. Well, the first thing to share with the broader group here is that the city has a building at the bottom of Pump House Road behind this Truxton Park pool and the area that you're referring to, that is called the Boathouse, and it has not been used in that way for many, many years. Unfortunately, that was its intention. I don't know the full history of that structure, but it's been kind of a shame that it's not been used in that way. It's right on the creek, behind a really well-utilized swimming facility that's been widely popular and a great success, in our largest city park, Truxton. 70 acres, has a huge forested natural area, and we have active projects underway to do restoration to the hillsides, which are in bad shape, as you know. Um, you know, paddle activities are the most sensitive type of watercraft use. So it's kind of hard to hear the argument that paddling would be inconsistent with habitat restoration, and particularly given that this type of sensitive use would be happening in the same public waterway where you have private, motorboats and sailboats just across the way. I mean, there's really no intention to damage the environment with these activities. They could be totally compatible. In fact, there'll be shoreline restoration as part of any type of improvement to this site. But the issues at the boat ramp, in terms of doing some kind of facility there, just that it's a heavily used site, and it has different constraints, frankly, because of the grants that were provided years ago to improve the facility. It's really, from the Department of Natural Resource perspective, it's supposed to be most heavily used by trailered boats. I mean, that's really the intention of that site. It's not off limits to people want to put a kayak or a paddleboard in, but that type of use should be totally secondary to the trailer boats. And we have a much better location where the boathouse is. So, I know from past meetings, I've had to hear fears of, nuisances from a paddle rental facility and all kinds of concerns about additional events and so forth. But really, within this plan, the only intention is to provide opportunities for kids and adults who don't have an access point to get in a kayak or a paddleboard within our largest park, which touches, half a dozen neighborhoods adjacent to it. And it's a type of use that's completely compatible with that park. So, I know we're going to continue working with your community and neighbors as this idea evolves, and I'm pretty confident we can do it in a way that meets everybody's expectations. But that's just the thinking behind it.
Well, thanks for explaining that. One of our major concerns is that that area of the creek is really a mud flat most of, on several days in the year. And I know you want to put in a floating dock so that people, and then there'll be some kind of walkway. That shoreline is very sensitive. It has no protection whatsoever. Whenever it rains, we just see all kinds of runoff coming off of the park. So I think there'll be more damage to the shoreline despite the efforts to try to protect the shoreline when you have a business there. But there's really not much area to park in. There's no bathroom facilities, and it's essentially a mud flat. So it just didn't seem like the right spot for that kind of facility. And I know I've heard from some of my neighbors that you've mentioned that dredging that area, could be done in order to support this business. Well, for those of us who have had dredging done, there's a couple of things that you should be aware of. One is that you can't dredge an area that hasn't been dredged before, unless you all have some way to convince, the state and the federal government that you can dredge that area if it's never been dredged before. And you also, you can't just dredge that immediate area. You have to dredge, the access to it. So you can't just dredge like a hole in the in the shoreline, in order to place a floating dock. I think what's going to happen is it will prove to be more expensive than is currently thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, the area does have a lot of sediment. I don't know, personally, I don't know what level of dredging, if any, is needed. We're actually looking at dredging in several other locations in the city, and I agree, it's not an easy thing to do or to get funded or to get approved. But we are fully aware of the process and the funding mechanisms for it.
Yeah.
So
I was just thinking that if you need a paddleboard concession, you may end up, you may want to take another look at the boat ramp area. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
sure, appreciate the comments. F.A. Brock, thank you. You can unmute and
All right, I'll unmute and lower my hand, Eric, I got a lot of comments. I don't want to waste everyone's time, but I want to say a couple of ideas that I heard that I really liked being discussed. And I want to address a couple of points that were raised that I've heard raised in other meetings. And also just very quickly, thank you and everyone else that put this together for having another opportunity for public input into this, very ambitious and I think good plan, and I look forward to it hopefully passing and becoming enacted in almost every single way. So just want to say thank you out there out front before I get lost in it. I'll email you a lot of the things I wanted to kind of hit on, but there was a comment that I wrote down from I think a gentleman named Tim that really kind of eats at what I feel is a weird friction between people like me who really hope that the fruits and general intent of this plan passes, which means expanding different points of water access, increasing the number and improving the ones that already exist. Because I went from living on 2nd Street in Eastport proper on the peninsula. Very grateful now to live still in Eastport, but a little farther away than where I once was, a block, 2 blocks, and 3 blocks from the water and these nice parks. And although they weren't like all the parks on the north side of Spa Creek, I still lived really close to the water, and I still consider myself in Eastport and living pretty close to the water. But obviously, I'm like a mile away now from my closest point of water access because I can't put anything into the water at Wells Cove, and Burnside doesn't have paddlecraft access. In fact, it's rotting away and falling apart. And so for me, the closest point would be 5th Street, I guess, which had been tied up until last week when after 22 emails, some of which you were CC'd on, someone finally got through and had those dumpsters taken off of the end of the street, blocking that point of water access. But the comment was this. And the comment, I'm reading it verbatim because I wrote it down and it just blew my mind. It really gets at the heart of this. If a tax-paying resident can't use 2 spots on their street, expect an uprising. If a tax-paying resident can't use 2 spots on their street and expect an uprising, that was something that was said. And I just want to highlight this because it kind of really puts you in the mind of what I think is the opposition to expanding water access, which is this weird NIMBYism. Now, let me just rephrase this. This is from someone who purports to live on Market Street. I'm not trying to get personal. This is just, I'm repeating what was said here in public comment, and I just want to get at the heart of what's being pointed out here. Someone who lives on this place in Market Street has access in their residential permit parking zone to 12 parks, street-end parks on the north side of Spa Creek that I don't have access to on the south side of Spa Creek because I don't live in that residential permit parking zone. If a tax-paying resident can't use 2 spots on their street, expect an uprising. I would like to have everyone listening to this right now think to themselves, why aren't we in an uprising? Why aren't we already at a point where I can use those 12 parks as equally as the guy that lives in Ward 1? And it just blows my mind because I'm here fighting for paddlecraft access at Burnside because we're unfortunately going to have to reevaluate our options at Wells Cove. Because we have a city that at every turn, not you involved here, but has given away public water access either for free or some weird concession in some site plan or scratched out of a lease agreement or decided not to apply for a deed, when they could. And there's like no oversight of this. And it ends up being that we have really, as you expressed earlier, really affluent, awesome neighborhoods to live in, like Murray Hill, where you can walk down to any street and it ends in a public street park. 7 or 8 of which have dinghy docks and floating docks that you can launch off of. Several of which aren't necessarily in the worst condition, but are being, applied for by well-organized neighborhoods, Ward 1 Residents Association, people that work with Spa Creek Conservancy. I mean, it kind of is, a little preferential to one side of Spa Creek here. These are well-organized neighborhoods that have maintained public water access, and they all enjoy the fruits of their labor. Whereas here, we're arguing over where we can put a paddle crafts concession stand. Talk about NIMBYism, not to get personal, but again, this is really highlighting a disparity because your plan, and I've read this many times, it is so focused on, environmentalism and improving equity. But here we have, Truxton Heights residents who are purportedly worried about the health of the shoreline. After all this being said in the testimony you heard right before mine, go back and hear this if you're going to replay it later. Listen to what was said. Worried about the shoreline. All of Truxton Park, pretty much all of the park, with exception of like the concrete ramp, which isn't necessarily accessible at all hours, so this is another thing that we kind of lack on one part of Annapolis, but have in others. So all of the park has basically a living shoreline, and any improvements or any increased points of water access are just going to improve that living shoreline and hopefully re-energize the health of it. All of the park has a living shoreline, whereas all of Truxton Heights neighborhood across from it on Spa Creek does not. It has the opposite of a living shoreline. Every single waterfront private property owner in Truxton Heights enjoys private water access through their own pier and a constructed bulkhead. So this isn't really about environmentalism. Okay. So the only concerns here that are environmental are acoustic, and we can fairly, politely dismiss those. We should be increasing public water access as much as we can, as ambitiously as we can, with as much critical thinking as we can about why it exists the way it does in some parts of the city right now, but there are gaps in some other parts of the city. I was really lucky to live where I did the last 4 years. I'm really happy that those street end parks are already in the pipeline in the in the capital improvement project budget. But just moving, and I'm very fortunate to now be like proper long-term resident here, but the disparity that exists between neighborhoods where there's an extreme, it's a concentration of all of our parks are on, like, at least for Spa Creek, they're all on the north side of Spa Creek. Burnside, I just spent the last 6 months getting the city to take down private parking signs that were outdated from the 90s, discouraging the public from parking there. There's no public parking there or private parking there. This park has just been ignored. We want to expand mooring access, but the city, it prioritizes diverting resources and funding towards parks that are close to commercial establishments. I'm really grateful to have met with Director Vogel a couple weeks ago. It took me a couple months of asking, but he finally met with me in person at Burnside, because if you don't know what Burnside is, it's the only point of water access on the south side of Spa Creek that is west of the bridge. So if you're in the greater part of Eastport, not on the peninsula, 6th Street and up, tight parking, everyone's going to hit your car while you're there for dinner. But if you're in most of Eastport, you have one park that you can go to. The wood and bulkhead is completely rotted and fallen apart. There may be 1 or 2 cleats where there should be 7. There wasn't a ladder to even tie up to and use. So someone installed their own. It got misused and broken. Someone installed a second one. And that's going to rust through at some point because the city didn't install it. It's a liability, in my opinion, because it's been installed with parts that are rusting now. But someone installed it because it had been neglected. And the pylons are gone. You can see through them into the water. All this to say, obviously, this park doesn't have paddlecraft access like the 12 on the north side of Spa Creek does. But Director Vogel went with me and he said, I see what you're saying about this. I'm paraphrasing. And he said, and this was his assurance, I hope it ends up being true, that next year DPW will apply for a DNR grant because, and this is kind of the last thing I want to point out here, because it's a good candidate for a DNR WIF improvement grant, a waterway improvement fund grant, because of its proximity to Blackwall Hitch. That makes no sense to me. Every point I had made to Director Vogel was about how it would improve the lives of the residents that live in the vicinity to bring this park basically up to par with all of the other projects that are going on already in the pipeline across from Spot Creek. And he's not a politician. He's a policy man and he's an expert in this field. And I'd never met him before. And I think I think every point he made to me was great. But I feel like the city's hands are tied because these decisions are clearly being made with commerce in mind, and I'm really hopeful that the goals of equity in this plan end up being kind of at the forefront, because not just like my half of Eastport, the things that are going on in Ward 3, Robert Eads Park, Altonia, Cars Wharf, these are places that have been, and I like this phrase, strategically underinvested in for too long a time. I think this goal has, or I think your plan here has all the right goals. And I really hope that, although amplified in, their coordination and organization and time to submit comment, I hope we can all really think critically about where public water access is. And it's not hard to improve on where it is further from that and make it a little more equal for us to access. Anyway, thanks. I'm going to shut up.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the impassioned comments. You're basically speaking to the core intent of this plan and our need to really reverse the way we've done things in the past in a lot of ways. Burnside, I'm pretty confident will be elevated as a priority. I mean, partly thanks to your advocacy for it. I think it is a prime candidate for funding, and unfortunately, that Waterway Improvement Fund program that you mentioned, it's kind of flawed in my view in terms of what it prioritizes, but because its funding comes from the gas tax, boat gas tax, it tends, I think projects have to be in close proximity to commercial sites, and so it makes it hard to fund certain other projects, but yeah, I mean, that's a site that we should have invested in by now, and it's a good candidate. Yeah, equity is going to be a driving force here, and I hope in the future we see a really different map of where water access exists. And all I can say is that this is going to be implemented in phases, and every single project is going to be done in partnership with local residents, and we're going to try to find the right balance where we need to. So we're nearly out of time. It looks like there's no other comments for now. Would anybody else like to say something before we adjourn?
Hi, Eric. Eric, this is Walt Laird here.
Hey.
And at the last meeting we talked about, you had, amended the requirement for public access and existing waterfront concerns. And now you've amended it to future waterfront concerns.
Yeah.
A discussion that we had was regarding the permitting process. And my specific question was bulkheading, where the process to repair and to maintain bulkheads is to do it outside the current bulkhead, because you can't remove the one that's there, because you would end up with a collapse of whatever's behind it. And the wording is suggestive that if you want to maintain your bulkhead, then it could kick in a clause because you could possibly encroach on the harbor requirement for public access in order to get the permit. Have you addressed that?
That's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. That is something that we need to clarify. I don't actually recall if it's in the memo or not, because I think it did come up at the in-person meetings. It is something we're going to clarify, though. What Walt, for everybody else's benefit, what Walt is referring to is a policy recommendation in the draft plan that was issued over the summer that basically says proposals for essentially pier extensions. That was the intent. Pier extensions that encroach into public waterways will need to provide public water access. And this was really because there are occasionally these requests to extend piers from private properties into public waterways. And we want to be mindful of how much impact those have into our public waterways. And really, we're trying to prioritize public water access here. It's not really, we're going to look at the wording and make sure there's no confusion, but this is not, the intent here is not to make it more difficult for somebody to repair a bulkhead or repair an existing dock. It's simply to protect our public waterways from encroachment. So, and again, the policy has to be written by City Council. This is a recommendation. I don't know how that would, I don't know if anybody's going to take up that policy idea and actually change the city code for this, but that's really the intent. So we'll look at that and see if we can clarify so that people who have bulkheads that need repairing or piers don't have to worry about this. But
I think the language you just used should be specifically and clearly delineated in the plan, because this is your recommendation to the council. And so it should be very, very clear that those would not trigger, public access requirements, or there's going to be a lot of money spent on attorneys and fighting over this. And you need to be clear.
I agree. And we'll definitely do that. Thanks for bringing that up again.
Eric, this would come up basically if you wanted to redo a pier like what was in the picture, if it was like on our screens, right? And if it's a private pier or you want to repair your bulkhead and you extend far enough out into the already mapped out harbor line that you're in public water,
Yes.
that's the concern here.
Yes. That's
Okay.
right.
So
But what you're
basically
saying is
already going
extending,
through
not
that process.
repairing. There's a
Right.
difference between repair
Yes.
and extend. And to repair a bulkhead, you have to place the new bulkhead in order to renew a bulkhead. And the only intent is to maintain. It has to go outside the existing bulkhead, and that could be considered encroaching. And I think the language has to be clear. I agree. If you're going to stick a pier way out into the channel, you need to honor the harbor lines. But we need to be very clear. We don't trigger inadvertently that kind of fight and that kind of problem with people and communities just trying to do proper maintenance of their bulkheads.
Yeah.
Knowing the city office of law as I've come to understand them, I think they would be very adversarial towards even entertaining the idea of going to bat with anyone that expressed a defensive interest as yours. That is probably clearly not what they're trying to do. And if that's your worry, I think I kind of understand it, and I expect that the language in the plan will be careful enough to make sure that line is not blurred there.
That
No.
that needs to be clear because we're saying intent, intent, intent. If it's not clear, you don't know what the future intention of anybody would be. And so it just absolutely has to be clear what the recommendation is.
No, I completely agree. Point well taken. We will definitely clarify that one. Well, we're over. I hope everybody's comments were heard tonight that had them, and again, you're welcome to reach out to me by email or phone. I'm always available if you have other concerns, but we're going to be busy making these updates to the plan so we can issue an updated draft before Christmas. So stay tuned, and again, really appreciate you all coming out tonight, and glad we could do this virtual meeting. So have a good rest of your evening. I guess we're going to sign off now.
Thanks for taking that.
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.